This is Duke University.
All black, everything, everything black, culture over everything, y'all, we taking it back, black.
Welcome to Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined today here at the John Hope Franklin Centers in the Left of Black studios with Professor Elizabeth Alexander, who's a Thomas E. Donnelly Professor of African American Studies and American Studies at Yale University, a widely published poet and essayist. She's the author of 6 books of poetry, including the classic Venus Hottentot, American Sublime, which was a finalist for the 2006 Pulitzer Prize, and most recently, Crave Radiance. She's also the author of 2 collections of essay, including The Black Interior. How are you doing today,
Very
Elizabeth?
well. I'm glad to be here with you.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, we've all known who Elizabeth Alexander was for a long time. America got to find out who you were in 2008, obviously because of the inauguration of President Barack Obama. But one of the things I was always struck with, you did an interview with the New York Times shortly before the inauguration, and you got into a conversation about what a black aesthetic was. And you mentioned that folks always kind of focus in on the content and never thinking about African American form. In terms of thinking about poetry and other forms of expression. I just wanted you to elaborate on that, because that's actually something that I've gone back to time and time again in thinking about black art in general. We always look at content, but we're not as, I won't say sophisticated, but not as adept in talking about, stylistically and in terms of form, what African American expression really looks like.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that we, the we of black thinkers, black artists, questions of what is the black aesthetic, what is black art, those are very old questions for us that we've been asking in different sorts of ways. But I think to the mainstream, black art is the news. Yeah. Black art is, who are these people? Black art is a vessel for what is sometimes a first encounter with selves who are far more complicated than the imagination, of the mainstream usually has reduced us to. Yeah. So I think that's why, over the course of publishing poetry for 25 years, I'm still struck that in reviews, not a complaint but an observation, very, very, very little time is spent, even when they like the book, talking about how the poems are made, what shapes they come in, what strategies they have, and rather it's about sort of the story of this poem and the black people in it is. So I think it's important for those of us who can spend some more time thinking and writing and talking to really focus on actually the tremendous innovation that has existed throughout our tradition that is formal.
Growing up in New York City in the 1970s, going to New York City public schools, we did have a taste sometimes of poetry from Langston Hughes or Gwendolyn Brooks, clearly figures like that. A little later in college, I think many of us get introduced to sort of the black arts poets in that tradition. But there was a sense, at least I felt growing up, 20, 25, 30 years ago, that black poets kind of held a presence in the black community. Almost as if everyone knew Langston Hughes. I remember talking with Jelani Cobb after Amir Baraka died, and he made the point that Baraka may be the last black literary figure that not only did the scholars know and the fellow artists know, but just cats on the corner knew who Baraka is. And do you have the sense that black poets still take up that kind of cultural space in black communities?
Yeah, and I would add to that, and I imagine he would agree, probably Maya Angelou and Nikki Giovanni are the last 2 of those kinds of titans who are standing, who are also best-selling authors. In Giovanni's case, very interestingly, best-selling as a poet. Maya Angelou best-selling as a memoirist. But that I think is at the core of who they were, though coming from a different kind of worldview in some ways, not always, than Baraka. So, it's interesting. Right now, I'm working on a couple of things, and one of the things I'm working on is a big Library of America history of African American poetry. And so I've been thinking sweeping thoughts and trying to think about how it is that African American literary critics haven't paid as much attention to poetry over the last 30 years as they have to the whole historical recovery movement, Black feminist writing, but particularly in the form of the Black women's novel, Black women's fiction, then the whole theory moving into cultural studies and so forth and so on. But there haven't been as many studies of poetry, and in a way, I think that's related to where you started, which is to say that the Black poet, the Langston Hughes as a celebrity amongst our people. That's kind of different from how we've thought about people who are worthy of literary study. Even with Langston Hughes, I've often thought that people could tell you that you knew what he looked like. That he's much photographed and iconically
Yeah.
imaginable. I would say the same with Angelou. I would say the same with Nikki Giovanni. I would say the same with Miss Brooks.
Right.
That picture
Sonia
of her
Sanchez
like this. I would
also,
say the same with Sonia Sanchez. So I think that here's the good news. So much has changed in as far as how publishing and public access and reward and award, how all of that has changed for Black poetry in the last 10, 15 years. It's absolutely astonishing. So prizes don't mean everything, but not being awarded or finalist for any of the prizes does mean something. And so just the fact that it's now no longer a surprise that there's a Black writer shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize, wins, that Natasha Trethewey in 10 years goes from first book to Pulitzer to Poet Laureate. Tracy K. Smith in I think 7 years goes from first book to Pulitzer Prize. Look at, Claudia Rankine just won the Jackson Prize, which it's been given, I think 6 have been given out. I got one, Harriet Mullen got one, she got one. My point is, half of them have been given to Black women. This is just a whole nother order of recognition for what we do. And so while it's, on the one hand, a few pennies for a few people, I think much more importantly, it symbolically says that the culture has gotten a little more ready to see the incredible, amazing flowering of Black poetry that's been there all along, but that hasn't gotten another kind of recognition different from the street corner recognition that you're talking about.
How much do you think it also has to do with the way, particularly for young audiences, that both hip hop and spoken word poetry have kind of displaced more traditional forms of poetry?
Well, the way that I'm often asked when I give readings and things about hip hop, and is they say, so is hip hop poetry? And I said, well, it depends on who you're talking about. Right. I mean, I can name you 10 knuckleheads, and I can name you 10 poets. I mean, so let's just not talk about this whole thing.
And I won't ask you to name them right now.
We won't do that right now. I might embarrass my children. But I do think, what's been a very wonderful thing about, amongst the many, many things there are to say about hip hop, is that now if I go to a school and people think that they're uncomfortable with poetry, I can say, because you could recite for me 25 poems right now that are hip hop lyrics. 100. So think of these things as, if not the same thing, as cousins. Language and wordplay. When you talk about, flow, for example, just to take one concept as we use it in talking about hip hop, that is, you don't even have to translate it to think about that which we are trying to achieve when we make poems on the page. What we prize, what makes a poem on the page not just some words carrying the news. What is it that makes it music? What is it that takes it from the body and into the realm of something that is memorable and something that is lyrical? What makes something a lyric? So I think I felt grateful for the opportunity with young people to be able to kind of, let hip hop be the easy road to poetry.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, your host. We're joined today by Professor Elizabeth Alexander, the Thomas E. Donnelly Professor of African American Studies and American Studies at Yale University, a widely published poet and essayist, publisher, author of 6 books of poetry, including the recent Crave Radiance. You directed African American Studies at Yale for some time. It's a field that is always kind of in transition. And I'm thinking in particular about the significance of, say, a Glenn Hutchins, you know, breaking off $15 million, you know, for skipping the crew up at Harvard. You know, what does that singular gift say about the viability of the field, right? Does it say more about the viability of the field, or does it say more about the viability of Skip's operation? You know, within the field.
Yeah, I think it says a lot of things. I mean, first of all, it says that a human being gave $15 million that he earned to the study of black
folks.
people.
Right, yeah, right.
Period.
Right.
That's astonishing. Then when you add into that, it's a white human being.
Yeah.
So I think that that's interesting as far as sort of, you know, the way that people always ask us, you know, or assume that we know what we know because we were somehow born with this knowledge.
Innately, yes.
You know, innately. All those books just were in our head when we were born. So I think that, you know, to sort of take away the assumption that black people equals black studies, and that therefore you don't have to work so hard to know it and to excel at it.
And no one else needs to know it, right?
And nobody else needs to know it. So I think that's really very, very important as well. I'm really interested in philanthropy because of what it exemplifies. So I think that the thing that we also don't know is how many people of means look at this gesture of Glenn Hutchins and get an idea. You know, I mean, I think that's really, really, really interesting.
And quite honestly, I mean, if you were to ask anybody directing the Black Studies Department now, they'd say, we don't actually really need $15 million. We'll take that. You know,
that's right.
But any significant gift that allows us to realize the vision
That's right.
intellectually that we want to realize,
That's
it
right.
would be beneficial to us.
And so, and I do think, I mean, you know, certainly in my 4 years at Yale, you know, we do need money because we need independence.
Right.
Because, you know, I can't speak for everywhere, but in, you know, trying to sort of be a very, very vigorous and active chair to develop some things in our own quite wonderful department, which we were able to do, hiring 7 faculty members, you know, tightening our graduate program, establishing a regular series of visiting lecturers, you know, even just getting our office staff in place, which, as you know, without that, it does not matter how many great ideas you have.
Right. If you don't have
If you don't have an infrastructure, if you don't have people to help you implement it. All of this at the time when the university was in a financial crisis, so that resources really had to be fought for. So in this time also, of course, I would, you know, talk about, it's a field I care passionately about with other people about what's going on. And I think for everyone, autonomy and money, it's an issue. Because to a certain extent, you know, we are all supplicants to university administrators, some of whom get it, some of whom don't, some of whom rotate out of their jobs, and then the landscape changes dramatically.
And you find yourself having the same conversations
over and over again. And sometimes those conversations are even about explaining or justifying the field or your needs in the field. Explaining over and over again, this is why it is significant to have black people in the social sciences, so that we are no longer merely the objects studied, but rather people studying ourselves. You know, that actually undergraduates want to take classes on, you know, black people in cities, and they want to take courses on, you know, mass incarceration, and they want to take courses on stereotype and bias. I mean, these are
social justice issues.
Social justice in large numbers. These are issues that students more, I will say, than they even want to study black poetry, for example. So I think that having your own money, you know, what I would use as a comparison at Yale, that, you know, we've been around for 40 and a bit years. The history department's been around much longer. Therefore, there are alums who have been given money, giving money for longer. Therefore, when their graduate students want to do a research trip somewhere, you know, need resources beyond what they have in their stipends, there's all kinds of endowed money that's there. And I think it's crucial that within our own community, we be able to do some of that ourselves. So a couple of things that we were able to do that I was glad about was we got a donation for actually the Henry Louis Gates lecture. As you know, Skip Gates was a Yale alum. And so Anthony Appia gave the first one, Willis Sayenka gave the second one, so that we could have a properly grand lecture, hopefully that will be visibility collected in book form at some point. and also an alum, a very dear friend of mine named Stuart Taylor, African-American businessman who's doing all kinds of interesting work, gave us money for traveling. For students and faculty to be able to travel, to get their notes translated, to hire assistants to go
deep into the
field with
archives,
them, whatever
right,
they go in
right.
the archive, and that our definition of the globe includes the United States.
Yeah.
So, it was once important to say that black people, as Gwendolyn Brooks say, we occur everywhere.
Yeah.
We occur all over the globe. But I think we said that so much that we forgot, like, Negroes occur
right here
in the United States,
right.
and that's important research too. So I feel that, to bring it to your question of the Hutchins gift, we need autonomy. We waste time being supplicants, and we need to be able to act on our visions. And I think also, a certain amount of this is unique to the incredible house that Skip has built, and that is its own thing at a unique university. So what can I say? I mean, I think among the many amazing things he's figured out, one of them is space. And to have a beautiful space with an art gallery and offices and visiting scholars, and to have it be smack in the center like that, I think also has very important long-ranging influence.
Absolutely. You're watching Left of Black. We're joined here by Yale professor Elizabeth Alexander. You're here visiting us on behalf of the Archibald Motley exhibit here at the National Museum, curated by Richard J. Powell. Talk a little bit about your sense of Motley's artwork.
Well, I first want to talk about Richard J. Powell, who is, just a wonder person.
Another Yale alum?
He was my TA, I have to say
Wow.
this, yes. So I learned with the best of them when I was in college. And, the quality and depth of his work, the contribution that he has made is very, very, very profound to, again, our ongoing understanding of black art. So I just think back on his work over 30-some years.
You think about two of the shows he's done in the last few years, Barclay Hendricks and Archibald Motley. I mean, these two figures who are kind of liminal to our sense of African-American art, and he really has recentered them in so many conversations.
He really, really has, and I think that also the way he always does it is with the thickness of research, the thickness of close reading. Everything that you can do to treat a painting, he puts it on it, and it gives us so much. I mean, I think to tie back to what we were speaking about earlier, in some ways, I think perhaps Motley was, in a shallow way, seen as a black artist who brought the news, right? That you would look at these pictures and you'd learn about Chicago at night, and you learn about what did Mexico look like at this time, and you would enter a world and learn about some folks. But I think that what I find so amazing is the pull and drive and energy and life force of his use of color. And I can't wait to go over and see the pictures in person, because I've only seen them in person here and there over the years. For me also, to be reading in their midst becomes like a kind of a duet. I think there's a way that poems heard in the space of paintings then have another sort of turn, and you can have something that's very exciting.
We've been joined today by Professor Elizabeth Alexander, who's the Thomas E. Donnelly Professor of African American Studies and American Studies at Yale University. She's the author of 6 books of poetry, including the recently published Crave Radiance, and also 2 books of essays, including The Black Interior. Thank you very much for joining us, Elizabeth.
This has been so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Black lights and Bruce burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything, everything black, culture over everything.